She thought she was just a secret, a woman hidden in the shadows of a billionaire's world. But the night she discovered the man she gave her heart, and her body, to was already engaged, everything shattered. Love turned into betrayal, desire into danger, and the truth, it was far more devastating than she could ever imagine. If you love forbidden romance, billionaire secrets, emotional twists, and shocking revelations, make sure you subscribe now, because this story will change everything you think you know about love, power, and sacrifice. She never planned to become someone's secret, yet the moment she stepped into the penthouse that overlooked the city like a throne above the world, her fate quietly shifted, slipping from her hands without resistance, as if destiny itself had already decided that this was where her life would fracture into before and after. The city lights below shimmered like scattered promises, and she stood there, Alara Moore, a woman with no inheritance, no safety net, and a past heavy enough to bend her spine, holding her breath as the man behind her closed the door. Julian Cross didn't speak immediately, and somehow the silence felt louder than any confession, thick with expectation, with the unspoken understanding that what they were about to begin had rules that would never be written down but would bind her more tightly than vows ever could. He was a self-made millionaire CEO, the kind of man whose name moved markets and silenced rooms, whose presence alone suggested control, precision, and a life built on winning, and yet when he finally looked at her, there was something restrained in his eyes, something almost dangerous in how carefully he measured her existence against his own. Their arrangement had started weeks earlier, not with passion, but with necessity. Alara had walked into Cross Global's headquarters for an interview she never expected to get, wearing borrowed confidence and shoes that pinched her feet, carrying the weight of overdue bills and a mother whose medical costs climbed faster than hope ever could. Julian noticed her not because she tried to be noticed, but because she didn't. She spoke plainly, intelligently, without flirting or fear, and when he offered her a position that went far beyond the job description, private assistant, off-record, generously compensated, she knew enough about power to recognize the warning hidden inside the opportunity. She told herself she could say no, that she should, but life had taught her that survival rarely arrived in clean, honorable packages. So she accepted, unaware that the true terms would reveal themselves slowly, dangerously, like a blade hidden inside silk. The first night he asked her to stay late, the office empty and the city breathing beyond the glass walls, he didn't touch her. He simply spoke the truth in a calm, level voice, explaining that he had no time for traditional relationships, no space for complications, and no interest in lies. What he needed, he said, was discretion, loyalty, and understanding. What he offered was protection, comfort, and a world she had never been allowed to step into. Alara listened, heart pounding, telling herself this was just another negotiation, another compromise life demanded. When she agreed, she did so believing she could keep her heart separate, that she could remain untouched in all the ways that mattered. She was wrong. Their nights became a rhythm she didn't question at first. Quiet dinners after midnight, the hum of the city below them, the way he watched her as if memorizing something he wasn't allowed to keep. He never stayed the night, never lingered in the morning, never spoke about his past or future. She told herself that distance was safety, that rules meant clarity, and that secrecy was simply part of the arrangement. Yet slowly, insidiously, Julian Cross became more than a man behind closed doors. He was the one who noticed when her voice trembled, who arranged things she never asked for, who defended her in rooms where powerful men spoke over her as if she were invisible. And in those moments, she forgot what she was to him, forgot the invisible line she was never meant to cross. Alara didn't fall in love all at once. It happened in fragments, the way he trusted her with decisions worth millions, the rare softness in his expression when he thought she wasn't watching, the silence they shared that felt strangely like peace. She began to believe that perhaps she wasn't just a secret, that maybe she was something more carefully guarded. The thought terrified her, but hope has a way of rooting itself in even the most forbidden places. She imagined a future she never voiced, one where secrecy dissolved into truth, where she didn't have to disappear whenever his public life demanded it. She imagined being chosen. The discovery came by accident, the way truths always do when they've been buried too long. A charity gala invitation left on his desk, elegant and embossed, bearing Julian Cross's name, and beside it, another name written in smaller, more permanent lettering. His fiancé. Alara stared at it longer than she should have, her chest tightening as reality rearranged itself with brutal efficiency. Engaged. Not rumored. Not complicated. Engaged. The word echoed inside her like a verdict, and suddenly every rule, every silence, every absence made sense in the most devastating way possible. She realized then that she had never been protected, she had been hidden. When Julian entered the room and saw the invitation in her hands, he didn't deny it. That was what broke her. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, as if preparing for impact, and confirmed the truth she already knew. The engagement was strategic, long-planned, beneficial to both families and impossible to break without consequences that extended far beyond emotion. He spoke of responsibility, of duty, of worlds she didn't belong to, and with every word, Alara felt herself shrinking, dissolving back into the margins where she had started. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask how he could let her believe she mattered when she was never meant to exist outside his bedroom. Instead, she listened, because silence had always been her armor. That night, she left the penthouse without waiting for him to follow. The city looked different from the street, colder, louder, less forgiving. She told herself she was done, that secrets were poison and she would never again be someone's hidden truth. But Julian Cross was not a man who let go easily, and the story between them was far from over. What Alara didn't yet know was that the engagement was only the surface of a much darker design, and that her presence in Julian's life had already triggered forces powerful enough to destroy them both. And as she walked away, carrying the weight of love she was never meant to have, Destiny watched patiently, because secrets like hers never stay buried for long. Perfect. Here's Chapter 2, the twists deepen, stakes rise, and secrets explode. I'm keeping it as a long, continuous plain paragraph narrative like Chapter 1. Chapter 2, Betrayal and Reckoning. Alara thought leaving that night would give her freedom, but freedom proved more elusive than she imagined, a mirage shimmering over the concrete and neon, always just out of reach. She returned to her small apartment, the walls closing in like the very expectations she had tried to escape, and for days she existed in a limbo of anger and heartbreak, replaying every touch, every whispered word. Every moment she had allowed herself to believe in Julian's carefully disguised warmth. Friends called, asking why she had vanished from the social scene, why her eyes carried a storm that she could no longer hide, and she smiled hollowly, offering excuses that sounded like lies even to her own ears. But Julian was never far from her mind, his presence a shadow, his absence a wound, and the knowledge that he was engaged, happy, committed, untouchable, gnawed at her relentlessly. Then came the first sign that her life would never be the same, a message, untraceable, direct, chilling in its simplicity. You are part of something bigger than you know. Stop walking away. Fear and curiosity collided, and despite herself, Alara returned to the world of Julian Cross, not as a willing participant, but as a pawn caught in a game she could not yet comprehend. When she arrived at a meeting he had requested, no explanations, no intermediaries, she was met not with apologies but with an ultimatum. Julian, in all his commanding presence, explained that her leaving had set off a chain of events that endangered more than their fragile secret, it endangered the company, his reputation, even her own life. She wanted to scream at the injustice, to tell him she was done playing roles written for her by someone else, but the truth hit harder. In this world of wealth, power, and alliances, there were no clean exits, only consequences. And the consequences for leaving Julian Cross were heavier than she could have imagined. She tried to maintain her dignity, to walk away once more, but the forces she had unknowingly entered were already in motion. A rival company leaked rumors of her involvement with him, a scandal engineered to humiliate her in front of the public, to make her regret ever stepping into his orbit. Every article, every social media post, every whispered conversation became a weapon designed to isolate her, to make her wish she had stayed invisible. And yet, it was during this period of public scrutiny that she realized she had underestimated Julian, not as a man, but as a strategist. While the world assumed he was distant, cold, indifferent, he was orchestrating events from the shadows, protecting her in ways no one could see, even as he appeared to abandon her. The realization was both infuriating and intoxicating. He was the architect of her suffering and, paradoxically, the only one capable of shielding her from it. Their encounters became a dangerous dance, each meeting charged with tension, desire, and unspoken resentment. Alara's heart waged war against her mind, torn between the man she had loved and the betrayal she could never forgive. Julian, for his part, remained inscrutable, occasionally tender, often ruthless, always holding her to rules she didn't fully understand. And then, the revelation came. The engagement, the fiancé, was more complicated than she had imagined. The woman he was promised to was not merely a social ally but a pawn in a corporate strategy designed to protect an empire, a union where emotions were irrelevant, where contracts outweighed feelings, and where loyalty to power eclipsed love. The fiancé's arrival in the city, poised and elegant, brought with it whispers of manipulation, deceit, and hidden agendas, making it painfully clear that Alara had been walking through a minefield blindfolded. Yet amid the chaos, a plan formed in her mind, a way to reclaim agency, to turn the game on its head. She began gathering information, quietly, strategically, using the skills Julian had admired but never fully acknowledged. Every document, every whispered conversation, every overlooked detail became a piece in her puzzle, each revelation strengthening her resolve. And when she finally confronted Julian, it was not with tears or pleas, but with a steely determination that made even him pause. She demanded honesty, clarity, and respect, refusing to remain hidden while the world assumed she was complicit in their secrets. Julian, for the first time, seemed genuinely unsettled, as if her defiance had awakened a force he had never anticipated, a woman who would not be tamed, a partner who refused to be collateral damage in his empire. The confrontation spiraled into a dangerous intimacy, where desire and tension collided, forcing both of them to confront truths they had long buried. Julian admitted that he had tried to protect her from the consequences of his engagement, from the labyrinth of power and politics that governed his life, but in doing so, he had underestimated her intelligence, her resilience, and her refusal to be treated as invisible. They argued, screamed, and yet, in the quiet aftermath, there was a fragile acknowledgement that neither could ignore the bond that had formed between them, a bond forged in secrecy, temptation, and peril. But peace was fleeting. The fiancé, suspicious and cunning, began to sense the emotional undercurrents she had ignored, initiating subtle maneuvers to assert control, to remind Julian of the contract that bound them, and to make Alara feel the weight of being an outsider in a world where appearances mattered more than truth. Just when Alara thought she understood the battlefield, another twist arrived, an anonymous tip revealing Julian's long-hidden family secret, a scandal so explosive it could destroy not only his career but her newfound power and independence. Trust fractured, alliances shifted, and Alara was forced to navigate a landscape where every move could be catastrophic. The man she had loved, the man who had made her feel wanted, safe, and desired, was also the man capable of manipulating the world, and her, without remorse. And yet, in the midst of danger and betrayal, she discovered a deeper truth about herself, that she could no longer be a passive participant in her own story. The woman who had once given herself completely, unquestioningly, to a secretive billionaire, was now plotting a path where she could demand respect, revenge, and, perhaps, even love on her own terms. By the end of the chapter, the game had changed. Secrets had multiplied, loyalties were in flux, and the city itself seemed to hum with the tension of impending revelations. Alara understood that she was no longer just a hidden lover, a pawn in someone else's empire. She was a player, and every secret, every betrayal, every desire was now a weapon she could wield. But the most dangerous revelation loomed largest of all. Julian's engagement, the scandalous whispers, and the power struggles were only the beginning. Behind the opulent facades, behind the city lights, lay truths so dark and twisted that when they finally emerged, nothing would ever be the same. And in that knowledge, Alara felt both fear and exhilaration, because she now understood that surviving the storm would require cunning, courage, and a willingness to cross lines she had once feared to even approach. Alara had thought she knew the rules of the game, but by the time the final pieces fell into place, she realized that everything she had believed, about Julian, about herself, about love, had been an illusion crafted by secrets, ambition, and desperation. The night began like any other in the city that never truly slept, with lights flickering across skyscrapers like distant promises, but for Alara, the air carried a charged electricity, the sense that the world was poised to reveal truths that could no longer be contained. Julian had called her to his private office, not with tenderness, not with veiled threats, but with an urgency that made her pulse quicken despite the weeks of betrayal, humiliation, and scheming that had passed. When she entered, she found him standing behind the desk, not in command but tense, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before, and that glimpse of humanity struck her with a confusing mix of desire and suspicion. He handed her a file, thick with documents, photographs, and correspondence, and in that moment she understood that what had been hidden from her, and the world, was far greater than she had imagined. The file revealed Julian's fiancé's true intentions, carefully masked behind elegance and charm. She was not only a strategic partner in the corporate world but also a manipulative force aiming to consolidate power by any means necessary, including ruining the lives of those who stood in her way. Alara's heart raced as she realized she had been pawns in a much larger game, her love and loyalty exploited, her secrecy weaponized to secure a political and financial alliance that she had no part in. Rage, betrayal, and disbelief collided inside her, and for the first time, she considered stepping beyond the role of victim entirely. Julian, watching her reaction, remained silent, letting the anger and revelation burn where it would, knowing that control was not absolute when emotions were involved. He admitted, reluctantly, that he had fallen for her in ways he could not articulate, that he had tried to honor obligations that shackled him while protecting her from consequences she was never meant to face, and that every decision he had made had been a careful balance between duty and desire. As the night unfolded, allies shifted, enemies emerged, and truths were exposed that no one in their orbit could ignore. Alara orchestrated her own countermeasures, using the knowledge she had painstakingly gathered to confront the fiancé publicly and discreetly, dismantling the carefully constructed illusion of innocence she had relied upon to manipulate Julian. The confrontation was electric, tension slicing through the room as words became weapons, glances carried threats, and alliances fractured under the weight of deceit. Julian stood beside Alara, not as a tyrant or manipulator, but as a man forced to reconcile the empire he had built with the feelings he could no longer deny, and together, they exposed a web of secrets that threatened to topple careers, reputations, and relationships alike. The revelation shook the city, drawing the attention of media, investors, and social circles, and in the chaos, Alara discovered a power within herself that she had never known, a resilience forged in betrayal and desire, capable of shaping her own destiny instead of being swept along in someone else's plans. Love, in its raw, unfiltered form, emerged amid the wreckage. Julian, stripped of his carefully maintained armor, confessed in quiet, trembling words that the truth he had denied for so long was simple yet devastating. He loved her, not the arrangement, not the duty, not the power that bound him to contracts and society, but her, the woman who had challenged him, defied him, and refused to be invisible. And Alara, scarred but unbroken, understood that the man who had once been an enigma, a secret, and a source of heartbreak, could also be the one who offered redemption, loyalty, and a love earned through fire. But the path forward demanded choices neither of them had expected. Julian had obligations, alliances, and consequences that could not be erased, and Alara had her own scars, her own independence, and a life she could not surrender lightly. The climax came not with violence but with confrontation of character, with courage, and with clarity. Julian ended his engagement, confronting the fallout with strategic brilliance and moral reckoning. Dismantling a future built on falsehoods and manipulation, and reclaiming a path where love and desire could exist without compromise to his empire. Alara, empowered by the truths she had uncovered, asserted her place not as a secret, not as a pawn, but as an equal, a partner in both life and business, someone whose worth could not be measured in whispers or shadows. Their reunion, though passionate, was tempered by the wisdom of survival and the understanding that the stakes had forever changed. They did not return to naive desire. They moved forward with eyes wide open, hearts alert, and hands intertwined, prepared to navigate a world that had once sought to destroy them but now had no choice but to acknowledge the power of their union. And in the aftermath, as the city lights continued to glitter below the penthouse that had once been the stage of secrecy and betrayal, Alara realized something profound. The woman who had given herself to a secretive, powerful man had emerged not as a victim, but as a force capable of shaping her own destiny. Julian, who had wielded influence with precision, learned that love could not be controlled, manipulated, or planned, it could only be earned, and in the process, they both discovered that their bond, forged in secrecy and tempered in fire, was unbreakable. Together, they faced a world that would never again underestimate either of them, a world that had witnessed betrayal, ambition, and desire collide in ways too powerful to ignore, and a future where love, hard-won and resilient, had finally claimed its place. The city hummed around them, indifferent yet eternal, but inside the penthouse, two people, scarred, tested, and fiercely alive, stood ready to claim the life, love, and destiny they had fought so hard to deserve, knowing that secrets may have shaped the past, but courage and truth would define the future.